Okay, here is our interview with Professor Declan Hill. So let's go to the root cause. So you're in the middle of doing some pretty major reporting about the origins of COVID and the Wuhan lab. You had mentioned that you had heard our recent podcast where my guest was asserting, just to sum it up, if I recall correctly, he's basically asserting that he believes it was an accidental leak from the Wuhan lab. He believes, however, that it was a bioweapon that was being designed, and that is what leaked out. That China immediately shut down Wuhan, locked everybody in their homes to try to stop the spread, but did nothing to try to stop the spread outside of China. So on the one hand, while they're trying to contain it in Wuhan, they don't bother to say cancel all the flights leaving China. And in that sense, according to my guest, they have blood on their hands that they didn't want to contain it to just China, and hence allowing all the flights to travel. So let's kind of start from that standpoint based on what the research you've been doing, and maybe give your thoughts on his position, and then get into yours.
Absolutely. I think this is the greatest story of our time. I run a podcast, crimewavespodcast.com, and I was talking with my producer, and I said, this is the biggest crime of our century so far, because the Economist Intelligence Unit puts the numbers, the true numbers of people who've been affected, killed by COVID, somewhere between 12.7 and 24 million people. So we're talking about an industrial accident on a genocidal scale, a slow motion Chernobyl. The only thing that I would disagree with your previous guest is that from the research that I've seen, from all the peer-reviewed papers, from the discussions, the debates on viruses that I've gone through, I don't think it came from the Wuhan Virology Laboratory, the BSL-4 thing. And the reason why I don't think it came from that place, which was now, as your previous guest said, been taken over by the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, is that they were doing dangerous COVID research in laboratories that had the standards of your local dentist's office. Even more shocking, there was a contract in June 2019. So that's 6 months before the epidemic was fully revealed to the world. And again, as your listeners will know, as you know, in the epidemiology, the study of the disease, it's like a little flat line. The disease can come out because some cleaner doesn't wash their hands, and it goes like a flat line, and then it starts to go up and up and up. So 6 months before that up and up went on, one of the laboratories at a much lower standard.
Sorry, when you say one of, explain what you mean. This is in Wuhan. Are you saying that Wuhan lab, there's multiple laboratories within Wuhan?
Yeah, oh gosh, yes, absolutely. Okay. I mean, people have been focused in on the WIV, which is what? The Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Okay.
And that's the BSL Biosafety Laboratory 4. And there's all kinds of problems with that laboratory. And I get into it in painstaking detail. It wasn't certified by, the company who constructed it. There were all kinds of issues. The deputy secretary there said that we've discovered hidden dangers and common problems, all kinds of issues around that particular lab.
Now, and just to be clear, is that the lab where we create viruses so we can figure out how to protect against them?
Here's the problem, James. There were 9 other laboratories in Wuhan. That was the crown jewel. These other laboratories were doing the same research, and they didn't have the same standard.
And so all of these are in Wuhan.
This is like, hey, I'm here in New Haven, and you got the Yale Research Lab doing this research. And they're like, hey, we have so much research, we're going to go around and give it out to our local high school. That's how they were doing COVID research, dangerous COVID virology research at these other laboratories.
But sorry, all of these are in the city of Wuhan?
Yes.
Are they all in the same location or different locations?
They're scattered through the city of Wuhan. And the city of Wuhan is actually quite large. It's about 11 million, so it's slightly larger than New York. And it's known as a research center for these viruses. And there's so many research scientists coming here. They're not just working at the main one. And there may have been problems, as your previous guest said, there may have been problems at that particular laboratory. But what I'm basing my evidence on is that they were also doing COVID gain of function research at BSL-2 and BSL-3 things. Let me please just give you a sense of the shoddy laboratory standards at some of these laboratories in China. Sorry, in Wuhan. I won't even concentrate on China, just in Wuhan. In June of 2019, so 6 months before the epidemic is fully revealed, one of these other laboratories in Wuhan puts out a contract to get rid of their hazardous waste. They've been collecting hazardous waste from these dangerous pathogens and dangerous viruses they've been researching on since 1994. Like, they had 26 years of hazardous material to get rid of. They had 2 tons of hazardous material to get rid of. That's the kind of shoddy standards that was going on in some of these BSL-2, BSL-3 laboratories. There's a famous virologist here in North America. He looked at some of the peer-reviewed papers that the independent researchers were finding, and they were finding that the guys were doing COVID virus research and saying, hey, everything's great in my BSL-2 laboratory. Everything's great in my BSL-3. And remember, these standards are like the local dentist or your local high school research laboratory. They're appalling. They should not have been doing this kind of dangerous virology in those types of laboratories.
And are those Chinese government-run labs?
Yes, absolutely.
And the one we always hear about is the main one, I guess, and that's the one where allegedly U.S. funds wound up going to.
Look, I don't think there's anything allegedly about it. U.S. funds were going there. And the great problem is that Western science around 2012 woke up to the dangers of gain of function. There were people in the Atomic Science in June of 2012. And the Bulletin of Atomic Science, as you and your listeners know, is a hugely reputable research journal. Came out of the nuclear Cold War. These are the guys who kind of blew the whistle on Chernobyl. And they said, there is an 80% chance with all the different lab leaks, with all the different lab accidents, there's an 80% chance that we're going to have a worldwide pandemic in the next 10 years from this kind of COVID gain of function research. This is the stuff that gradually the Obama administration went, well, hang on a second, we shouldn't be doing hidden gain of function. We're going to stop this in the United States. Similar things were happening around Europe. And what did these bozos do? They did what so many of the capitalists have done in our society in the last generation. They offshored it to China. And this type of research, again, another famous research scientist said, this type of research is like looking for a gas leak with a lit match. Like the idea of what these guys were doing. And the research laboratories, again, I don't know if your previous guest had said this, are shoddily run. They're terribly run. It's common practice in Chinese research laboratories to take the animals that they've injected with viruses, injected with pathogens, and sell them to the local butchers. And I'm not talking about James and Declan having a couple of beers and saying, hey, let's get rid of our rabbits. This would be a great idea. I'm talking about organized crime racketeering, where some of these morons in their research laboratory were making close to $1 million from selling pathogen-tainted meat to the local markets. So you've got serious problems of safety standards with hazardous waste. You've got serious standards in training. These guys think it's proper. And you have, when the American State Department goes to this Wuhan research complex, these 8 or 9 different research laboratories, WIV, the main one being one of them, the Chinese research scientists who run up these laboratories are begging the American diplomats, saying, hey, we have terrible professional standards here. We need your help training these guys. The head of the WIV, the top lab, the crown jewel of these research laboratories in Wuhan, writes a peer-reviewed article in October 2019. So again, just months before the rest of the world finds out what they're doing, where they write about how bad the standards are. So again, it's not Declan Hill saying, oh, these guys are terrible. It's they said it. And even Premier Xi Jinping said this about it.
Thank you again to our guest, Professor Declan Hill. You can check out his podcast, Crime Waves, wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you to our producer, Michael Parker. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of The Hidden Truth Show.
Thank you for listening to The Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow. You can find us at hiddentruthshow.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show. Join us again next week for another episode of Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow.